I just finished The Legend of Zelda, A Link Between Worlds for the very first time, which means it's time to sit down and give my full spoiler-free review of the game. My name is James, and I started this channel simply because I love video games. If that sounds like you, please subscribe to my channel so that you can see more videos just like this one. A Link Between Worlds is the final Zelda game that was released on the Nintendo 3DS. So obviously I played the game on my new 3DS XL, and I played the game for about somewhere between 17, 18-ish hours over the course of about 2 weeks. The game came out in 2013, and it uses the same map as 1992's A Link to the Past. As a lifelong Zelda fan, you might be wondering how I've made it 11 years without finishing this game. I'll get there, but let's first get started with the positives. Very first thing on my list here is the dungeons. There are lots of dungeons in the game, and pretty much all of them feel distinct, and a lot of them will have a central mechanic to them or require you to use a certain item to get through them. But overall, especially with the last couple Zelda games that I've played, being Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom, it felt really good to play a Zelda game with real Zelda dungeons that you can't break using special powers or anything like that. And while we're talking about dungeons, I should mention that I do like being able to go to the different dungeons in any order. It adds a certain amount of freedom to the game that I really enjoy, but we'll talk more about that later. One of the mechanics they introduced in A Link Between Worlds is the I don't remember what they call it, where you fuse onto a wall and then can crawl across flat surfaces. I was super skeptical about this at first, but it actually is pretty fun, and there's also lots of cool puzzles that are tied to it as well. And the next thing that I do actually really want to talk about is the puzzles in the game. I did feel like this game had a nice balance of the puzzles, especially in the dungeons and in the overworld, being able to see something and thinking like, okay, how do I get there? I can go through this cracked low rule and then use that to crawl up there, and then go on that wall and crawl along that wall to there, and then I'll be able to get to the heart piece. And getting to have moments like that is very fun for me. Especially the dungeons. The dungeons, I felt like, did a really great job of being simple puzzles without being obvious. I can't think of any specific ones off the top of my head, but I know there are some Zelda dungeons. It's usually like the first dungeon in the game where you walk into a room and you instantly know, like, okay, this is what I have to do. Part of that just comes from having played lots of Zelda games. So none of the dungeons in the game really feel like an introductory dungeon to Zelda, which I actually really like. It feels like this is a game that was made for people that are already fans of Zelda, which I like. Last positive for me is that I didn't have to look anything up. That being said, I didn't care to find all of the little shell creatures, and I didn't care to find all of the heart containers, but I was able to get through the entire game without looking up any puzzles or where to go, and there's no like bizarre trading sequences, none of that stuff. As somebody who's getting older and doesn't quite have as much free time, I like that I was able to figure out what was going on in game with the information in the game. I can't help but feeling like maybe that's because the game was a little bit too easy or obvious, but we'll talk more about that later. It's time to move into the mixed section. These are things that might not be all good or all bad, but maybe it's a good mechanic with a bad aftertaste, or a fun idea with a big downside. But all that stuff is gonna be here. First one that I put down is pick up and play. So one of the things that I do really like about this game is that you can you can pretty much pick it up and play it and kind of figure out where you were pretty easily. That if you forgot what was going on, there's X's on the map for the dungeons that you haven't done yet. But one of the downsides there is that I do feel like people, myself included, can be too comfortable stepping away and taking a break from this game. I think that's why I had never finished this game until now. That I would get distracted by something else and think like, oh, I'll just hop back in, like it'll tell me what to do when I get back. And then I just get distracted, and then knowing myself, when it's been a while since I've played a game and I pick it up again, I want to start over. Slightly related to what I was talking about it being easy to pick up and play, I do feel like the game holds your hand a little bit too much. I mentioned the X's that they put where all the different dungeons are. That's a little too handholdy for me. That I feel like you should at least have to go and talk to somebody, and they'll like talk to different NPCs, and they'll be like, yeah, this dungeon is over here. And then it might put an X there. I did find that to be a bit much. This is also somewhat related to what I talked about earlier about not having to look anything up. Part of the reason that I didn't have to look up anything was because there isn't anything to look up, just because the game kind of hands it all to you. The next mixed for me is that the dungeons are available in any order that you want. I mentioned this earlier in the positive section and said that I would talk more about it. I feel like letting the player experience the dungeons in any order does obviously come with some problems. I mentioned that none of the dungeons feel very introductory, but if all of the dungeons are available right away, you also can't make any of the dungeons very difficult, which I'll talk about difficulty later as well. So you're giving your players the freedom to figure out where they want to go and what they want to do, but it costs you the progression of taking on harder and harder challenges. The last mixed one for me that I believe is the hottest debate topic for this game, which is the item renting system. If you've played this game, if you've played any of this game, you know that all of the items are available to you right from the very start, which is cool. It's nice to be able to access all of them right away. However, you're first introduced to items on a rental system where it's like, oh, you pay 50 rupees and you can hang on to the bow for a little bit, but when you die, you're gonna lose the bow. Which I guess is fine if you want to rent all the items and then you don't die, but I do die. I die a lot. The other option, later on, you're given the option to purchase specific items. It'll be like, okay, you can rent it for like 50 rupees, or you can buy it to keep forever. Even if you die 1,000 times, you'll keep the item for like 1,000 rupees. Previously, when I tried to play the game, I would say like, okay, well, obviously I want to buy all of the items right away so I can play the whole game with all of the items, which is definitely not how the game is designed to be played. And what I would end up doing is just grinding in the world for rupees, which is not fun. So this time specifically, I ignored all of the items until I felt like I needed a specific item for a task, and then I would go see our purple bunny friend Rovio, and I would purchase and not rent the one item that I needed, which was a much better experience. One of the things that I think could make the renting system better is the ability to re-rent the items that you have on you right when you die if you have enough rupees for them. I know this wouldn't really make sense, but I think it would be a quality of life improvement. And one of the downsides of being able to access all of the items at the beginning of the game is that I do feel like it limits the rewards that the game can give you in dungeons to pretty much just rupees and keys and some like master ore, which is fine, I guess, but I was missing the feeling of going into a dungeon and being like, I wonder what I'm going to find in here, because we pretty much knew that it was going to be rupees or keys. Before I get into the negatives, if you haven't yet, please go ahead and subscribe to my channel. I'm trying to hit 300 subscribers by the end of this year. And that does bring me to the negatives. I don't have a ton of negatives, but I got a few that I feel like I should mention. The map is not great. The dungeon maps are fine, but when you're in the outer world, when you're in the overworld, I wish it was more clear on the map. This section leads to this section, which leads to this section, and there's a pathway here, or this is blocked off. I found myself having to re-navigate a lot, which could be a me problem, but I think it's worth bringing up. Next thing is that the Mai, I think they're called, the little shell creatures that you collect, and the big shell creature will like upgrade your items and stuff. I think there's just way too many of them. You're finding these things everywhere. And I was looking, there's the same number of these that there are gold Skulatola in Ocarina of Time, but the difference is that Ocarina of Time is a much bigger and longer game, that you're not tripping on gold Skulatolas everywhere you go. And then the final one, and this is more of a nitpick, but I did think that the final boss was a little bit too tough. When I first got to the final boss, I had 15 hearts and the blue tunic, and I wasn't able to beat it. And I wasn't able to beat it probably like 10 more times. And then I came back with the red tunic, which halves the amount of damage you take, and still 15 hearts. And that felt like it was an appropriate leveled challenge. However, I don't really think that you should have to fully upgrade your gear in order to make the final boss feel like a reasonable challenge. I think fully upgrading your gear should result in the final battle being like a little bit easier. But like I said, that's more of like a nitpick. And I know that other people are going to probably disagree. They're going to say that the final battle should be difficult no matter what. But something about going into a battle and about going into a pretty long final boss battle and taking 3 or 4 hearts worth of damage with every hit just isn't really fun to me. And that's all I've got today. Guys, in the comment section, please let me know what you love about this game. What am I wrong about? And I want to give a huge shout out to my buddy Kevin over at 2-Player Co-op. I think this might be his favorite 2D Zelda, if it's not A Link to the Past. But make sure to check out their channel and give them a follow as well. Guys, until next time, the best way to keep up with me is on Twitter and on Instagram at James_Solar. Thanks, guys.